And welcome to Let Them Talk. And here's where we go up the revolution. And I welcome back our frequent guest, Carl Dix from the Revolutionary Communist Party, Revolution Nothing Less. Welcome, revcom.us. Good to have you here, .us.
Thanks for having me on again.
Great, great. Let's shake hands again to show unity of purpose here.
Get that on TV.
Yeah, I want to get that on TV, right. And so while we're talking about the big film showing, as you can see behind me, Marcus Garvey Park Theater in Harlem, and we're going to a film of a talk by Bob Avakian, and we're going to hear who that is and why that is. And of course, I want to, just because we have, this show is the opinions of the person on the show, and it's their opinion, and I have people on because I think they're really interesting, and I think they have interesting things to say. It doesn't mean I endorse or not endorse, although I endorse a lot of the things that the Revolutionary Communist Party says, but not all of them at all. And I've had Chris Flash and other people on who have different views, anarchist views and different things like that. But I think it's important that we cover all the folks who are really determined to try and drive this Donald Trump maniac out of office, and I really appreciate the work that your organization has done over the years towards that. So welcome to the show, Carl Dix. And tell us, what is the main reason? Why are we here today?
Well, I'm here today to let folks know about this film showing Thursday, 2 days from today, at 7 o'clock in Marcus Garvey Park. We're going to show the film of a talk by Bob Avakian. It's titled "The Trump-Pence Regime Must Go. In the Name of Humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. A better world is possible." And look, I'm on the host committee for this. I really urge people to come out because, look, a lot of people already know they hate Donald Trump and everything his whole crew and cabal represent. But here's what they need to know. They need to know the true nature of this fascist regime, where it came from, how we ended up in a situation with the fascist regime in power.
That's why you're here, Carl. That's why you're here.
What we can and must do about it. And you're going to hear the hard truth on all of that in this talk on Thursday night.
Great. So actually, we're going to begin. So we've told people about the event. It's happening on the 30th. It's at 7 p.m. It's in Harlem. Folks definitely get this all over Manhattan, so they should be watching. And we're going to actually play a clip.
Yes.
Sort of a trailer for the film, right?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to play the trailer now. And so what are we going to see in the trailer?
Well, in the trailer, we've pulled together a few threads that run through the film. Things that Avakian elaborates on through the film, goes back to, and ties together.
All right, great. So we'll do that. We'll go, and then we'll come back. So stay through the trailer, and then we're going to come back and we're going to discuss what we've seen.
We are now being ruled by a fascist regime, relentlessly assaulting civil rights and liberties and openly promoting bigotry and inequality. This has caused disgust, anger, and agonizing among huge numbers of people. And there have been many important acts of resistance, big and small, to the continuing outrages committed by this regime and its supporters. But the regime remains in power and is determined to ride roughshod over all obstacles to carry out its monstrous agenda. And the need for a massive outpouring of people acting together non-violently, but with sustained determination to create a political situation where this regime cannot remain in power, cries out. The organization Refuse Fascism, refusefascism.org, has put forward a call and a plan and is actively building for that mass mobilization. So this poses sharply the immediate urgent challenge we face. Calling this regime fascist is not an insult, but speaks to the terrible reality. There is a direct line from the Confederacy to the fascists of today, and a direct connection between their white supremacy, their open disgust and hatred for LGBT people as well as women, their willful rejection of science and the scientific method, their raw America First jingoism and trumpeting of the superiority of Western civilization, and their bellicose wielding of military power, including their expressed willingness and blatant threats to use nuclear weapons to destroy countries with the finger of a demented bully on the nuclear button. A regime that, without exaggeration, threatens not just greatly heightened suffering for the masses of humanity, but the very existence of humanity itself. It used to be a common saying, to the person of the right, order is more important than justice, while for the person of the left, it is the opposite. Now the question is put squarely to liberals, and really to everyone. Which, after all, is more important? Order, even if that is the order of fascism, with everything that means? Or justice, even if that means stepping outside of our comfort zone and putting ourselves on the line to prevent this fascism from consolidating its rule and fully implementing its program? Whether we consider ourselves revolutionaries, convinced of the need for a radical overturning of the system and thorough transformation of society, or we believe that it is possible to bring about changes that will lead to a more just society within this system. Whether our understanding is that America is not and cannot be a force for good in the world, or we hope it still can become that, all of us need to come together and act together with the urgency that corresponds to the terrible present and the gravely imperiled future that this fascist regime represents for humanity, and with the conviction that something far better is necessary and possible. Thousands must be organized to take to the streets in cities all over the country, beginning on November 4. Overcoming fear and feeling the strength of their common cause and action and their common aspiration and determination. Making clear their resolve to not just make a statement, but to continue, and more than that, to spread and multiply their numbers and impact until millions have been mobilized and refuse to stop until the demand has been met. This nightmare must end. The Trump-Pence regime must go.
All right, great. So that gives you a little taste of what people will see at the movie. Now, are you expecting a big turnout?
No, we're working for a big turnout. I mean, hundreds of people can fit into that amphitheater in Marcus Garvey Park, and we're working to get as many of them into there as we can. We've got a host committee that is composed of, and I always forget somebody. Let me see if I can get it right this time. Myself, Herb Boyd, the Harlem-based author, academic, and activist. Reverend Luis Barrios, who is active on a number of fronts, the immigration front, community issues in Washington Heights. Pastor Doris Johnson from Queens Faith Tabernacle, the Grammy Award-winning musician Arturo O'Farrell, Dred Scott Tyler, the New York-based but nationally known artist. And see, here's where I start forgetting people. Hawa Ba, the mother of Mohammed Ba, who was murdered by the NYPD in September of 2014, I believe. And Kosi Anderson, who's a graduate student at Union Theological Seminary. And David Ornstein, a professor at Medgar Evers College and a published author.
Okay.
That host committee, a lot of different people. You've got some atheists like me in there, a revolutionary communist. You've got some religious people motivated by their religious beliefs to fight against injustice, artists, authors. What brings us together is that we think everybody needs to see this film. Everybody needs to get the hard truth about the exact nature of the regime that's in power in this country, what threat it poses to humanity, and the need and possibility for a broad diversity of people to come together and drive it out.
So you don't just see the Trump administration as just some populist, demagogue who just got off, who's more of a joke than anything. He'll probably be voted out of office, or nothing much will come of it because he can't really get people to do what he wants because he's too crazy. You don't see it that way.
I definitely don't see it that way. And see, I think we need to do two historical checks on the Trump regime. Because much of what you said about Donald Trump was said about Adolf Hitler.
They still say he was crazy.
This guy's a
funny
joke.
mustache and everything.
They said he couldn't pull it together. And a lot of different political forces, including, unfortunately, the communists in Germany, said he can't keep a government together. He'll have a few months in office, it'll fall apart, and then it will be our turn to form a government. And instead what happened is that Hitler won an election without a majority of the popular vote, sound familiar, used that election to totally transform German society and make it impossible for people to remove him through the channels of the system. And we saw what that meant for humanity. Now with Donald Trump...
But Germany is one country where a very, culturally a very, people followed the leader there already in their culture. They had a king and before that an emperor and all these kind of things. The United States is a chaotic sort of society. Nobody's ever been able to get all the chickens following one person at any one time.
Okay, but let's be clear. The United States is not Germany
in the
1930s, and that has its good and bad aspects. One thing that has been an American value from the beginning is savage abuse of black people from the very beginning. And it actually wasn't the case that Germany was the place where Jews were most despised and gone after. In fact, a lot of Jews thought nothing could ever happen in Germany like happened, because Germany was much better than the countries to the east in its treatment of the Jewish people. So there's something to work with in terms of a fascist America. And it can't come exactly the way fascism came to Germany, but it can come based upon the actual history of America. And some people say, look, America's got a long democratic tradition. Fascism can't happen here. And this is something that Avakian speaks to in this film. He says, look at what has already happened here. Look at slavery. Look at slavery by another name after slavery was abolished. Look at the many lynchings of black people that happened. Look at the white mobs that went after black people in the period from the end of the Civil War up to the 1960s. And look at the role the police department plays today in relation to black people, and the way in which right now
the militarization.
A lot of white people are being called forward to become unofficial adjuncts of the policing of black people, like the white people who called the cops on black people for barbecuing in the park, for being at the pool, for taking their kids out to, in other words, for being black and out in society. See, this is America, and we have to actually recognize that, and that's one of the themes that Avakian explores there and brings people to the point of look at what America has always been and look at the ways in which this fascist regime is building off of this. Another thing that he brings out is that we have to look at the fact that this Trump-Pence regime, and it is a Trump-Pence regime, it's not the somewhat ridiculous figure who is the head of it.
Yeah.
There is a whole regime behind him, and we should look at the fact that these guys are on a mission and on a rampage. And the figure at the top has already said, if elections go against me, I will not accept the legitimacy of them. Remember that from 2016? He was actually already saying then, if I lose, I'm going to say this was rigged. And it just so happened that he didn't have to say that because thanks to the Electoral College, without winning the popular vote, he won the election. But what will he say this time?
Right.
What will he say if the Mueller investigation, which a lot of people are putting a lot of faith in, comes out with some very devastating evidence against him? He's already got Rudolph Giuliani, who I sometimes refer to as Adolf Giuliani for
well, I remember him as mayor here.
Very good reason.
Right.
Is preparing people to reject anything that comes out of that by talking about sometimes truth isn't truth. There is a very real threat of a fully fascist rule being consolidated in America. And people have to look at that and prepare to act. And watching this film is going to be an important part of coming to understand that and understanding what can and must be done.
Might it be more comparable maybe to Argentina when they had the military took over there? And, I had friends who lived in that, and they said it was the most horrific thing in the world because Argentina was a country that had some modicum of, rights, and then all of a sudden one day people are being dragged out of their houses and the neighbors are telling the media when they show up and say, "What happened here? I didn't see anything." Do you see that kind of thing happening in America?
There is definitely.
We have 50. Do we have 100 million Americans who are capable of that kind of fear and easy to control, what have you?
Yeah. See, I think there's definitely a parallel there, but here's where it doesn't quite follow through. Argentina can't play the role in the world that the U.S. already plays and could play in a much more despicable way. I mean, there's a point to saying there's a demented bully with his finger on the nuclear button because there is a president who has asked, why can't I use nuclear weapons?
Right.
Now, we should think about that and realize and watch these guys.
Absolutely. But didn't that start before
him.
that with Obama? I mean, Obama was one who was the first one to say we want $1 trillion nuclear weapons refurbishment. I mean, I've had people say to me they don't see any real difference. Is there a difference between the sort of Democratic Party pandering and remember it was Clinton who was responsible for so many people being put in jail under mass incarceration.
Mass incarceration really took a leap with Bill Clinton,
and Donald Trump is going
Democrat.
around and saying he's done more for black people than any president in 20 years or 100 years, that he's providing jobs, and he has a lot of black support.
Well, he actually doesn't have that much black
He has
support.
some, though. It surprises
me.
me
Real.
that he
There are
does.
some black people
Yes.
who get with it, but let's be real. When Nat Turner led a slave uprising in 1831 in Virginia,
Yeah.
I believe it was this month that it happened, there were some enslaved people who dropped dimes on the rebels and helped the slave masters get their forces together to crush that slave rebellion.
There's sure going to be a lot more of those on the white side, too, I'm sure.
In any situation, very oppressed people can be won to stand with their oppressors, just like the Judenrat in Germany, who administered the ghettos that the Jews were forced in
these
for the
people
Nazis.
who
So we should
see
look
these
at that.
events and stuff.
But we should also look at, Donald Trump can say all he wants about I've done more for black people. What he is actually doing for black people is calling forth white supremacist upsurge that had been forced under the rocks. Now, it isn't that the Democrats represent a different kind of system than the Republicans or the Trump Republicans, the Trumpite fascists, because they both represent a capitalist imperialist system, and Avakian will bring that out and show what overlaps from that, but also what is different, and that's another reason people need to come out to this film.
Tell us when it's going to be and where it's going to be.
Again,
we're
it's
just
gonna
getting a
be
taste of it, right?
Thursday, August 30th, 2 nights from tonight, 7 o'clock in Marcus Garvey Park in the Amphitheater. You can enter the park at 124th Street and 5th Avenue in Harlem, and sun goes down. We're going to start showing the film a bit after 7. It's about an hour long. And people really need to come out and watch this because they're going to get an understanding. Because we're not, in our approach, look, as a revolutionary, I want to drive this Trump-Pence regime out as much as anybody. But I don't want to drive it out to get back to America the way it was before Trump, because it was already a horror. Mass incarceration, police terror. Obama was called the deporter-in-chief by people in the immigrants' rights movement because he deported
just wouldn't use that type
more
of
immigrants than any
rhetoric.
president before him.
Yeah.
But he didn't come out and say Mexicans are drug dealers and rapists. He didn't say, I saw some very fine people among the white supremacist Nazi KKK thugs who marched. Obama would wring his hands, even shed crocodile tears over police murder of black people, but he still presided over the system that was carrying all those horrors out. And that's because the approach generally of the Democrats is to keep the system in effect by drawing a few more of the oppressed into its actual administering and enforcement. What we're getting from Donald Trump is a very extreme form of the iron fist, and this is what it comes down to.
Why is
the
that?
police
What
should
that?
stop being so nice to the people they arrest. police who we've seen on TV in videos brutalizing and murdering people. And what brought that out is, look, there's a division in the ranks of the rulers of this country. Do we need more of the kill them with kindness approach, or do we need to just come out and kill them? And they all come down to killing, but it's being greatly intensified by this Trump-Pence regime. And a significant section of the people who run this country came down on the side of, we need this iron fist. We need to bring out.
What brought that on? Why do we switch from the velvet glove to the iron fist? What happened in our society and the world that brought it to this point?
Okay, that's a very good question, and it's one that's going to be going on in the film. We should be clear that the iron fist never disappeared, because Avakian talks about the direct line from the Confederacy to the fascists of today. One thing it runs through is the Southern strategy that the Republican Party adopted in the 1960s. Nixon openly talked about it. Ronald Reagan, who some people are trying to grab and oppose to Donald Trump, went to Philadelphia, Mississippi to announce his campaign.
I remember well.
What was Philadelphia, Mississippi? The site of outrages of the civil rights movement. And Reagan says, I believe in states' rights. States' rights was nothing but code word for violently keeping black people in their place. So there's been a progression through this, and the Republicans have been the vociferous opponent, outspoken proponents
they were losing.
of it.
That's the Southern strategy.
And then you have the Democrats coming in, like Bill Clinton, doing the upsurge in mass incarceration, carrying out the criminalization and demonization of black people. You have Barack Obama coming in and lecturing black people on it's really your fault, and if only young black people would pull up their pants and black parents would turn off the TV and make the kids do their homework, these problems like mass incarceration and police terror wouldn't happen.
Sister Soldier, remember Bill Clinton with
yes,
that?
I remember.
He made a big point
I remember all that. I'm
denouncing,
going through that.
Denouncing, going out of his way to denounce basically a singer, you know, because he didn't like the tone of her lyrics.
But the real point was, I can keep these black people in their place. That was the point to the Sister Soldier
and that was supposed
episode.
to be what Obama was supposed to do, and he didn't.
Obama came through with his speech on race, where he did a big thing on personal responsibility and really put it on the onus on black people for the things that were being done to them. And that was supposed to be his role. And look, Obama actually initially took people out of the streets and got them to go along with the program. But then into his second term, people were like, well, we got a black president, but black people are still being gunned down in the streets by police. And then you had the explosion of Black Lives Matter, and it's like, for a lot of the forces that run this country, what good's a black president if black people are still going to protest the things that our system is doing to us?
That made the argument for we try it your way.
And there was already forces for that kind of approach. Sure. And this time they won out. And look, Avakian will get into this. It actually represents a very serious turning point, that it won out not in the form of a continuation of the Bush dynasty or something like that, but a leap in terms of the Trump approach, where we let this stuff hang out. The Republican Party used to do dog whistles. You know, people would talk about them as dog whistles, commercials about Willie Horton, other things that made real clear when they spoke to these reactionary white supremacist, anti-woman, anti-LGBT forces
well, you
in
know,
their
a
base.
dog whistle is you blow it and humans can't hear it.
Humans can't hear it, but dogs can.
In other words,
that's why they called it a dog whistle.
Most people can't hear it, but the racists could hear it.
Well, Trump uses a bullhorn.
Right. He doesn't bother anymore.
Everybody hears it.
I see what you're getting to. All right, great. And there's so much there is fascinating to me. We could touch on a lot of things. I mean, McCain just died. He wouldn't let Trump come to his funeral. Why isn't he a member of the RCP?
Well, he's not a member of the RCP because he's a reactionary, hidebound proponent of capitalism, imperialism, who personally participated in mass murder at a long distance against the Vietnamese people. And look, in the face of all of the talk about McCain as a hero and how great his legacy was, let me keep my language okay for TV.
It's all right.
When people talked about thanking him for his service. I said, F him for his service. What was he doing in Vietnam that you guys think was so heroic? He was dropping bombs on the Vietnamese people. This was part of trying to bomb a liberation struggle into the Stone Age, trying to drown the Vietnamese struggle in blood, and that is not something that human beings should be upholding, calling heroic.
Why is he opposed to Trump?
He's opposed to Trump because
the minute version
still feels like this was a step that wasn't necessary and in the long run would be detrimental, particularly to the conservative forces in society, that they're all going to get painted with this brush, and that's going to make it hard for them to maintain a hold on power. And that was his differences, because on a number of policy positions, he actually stood with Trump, the tax bill, different things like that.
He didn't like the talk.
He felt this was the wrong way to do it.
And the language.
About the only policy thing where he didn't go with Trump was on the health care vote, where he went thumbs down on it. And that might be a case where his personal animus to Trump overrode his policy things, because he had been one of the people talking about we got to get rid of Obamacare, and he wouldn't vote for it. But these are all things that Avakian's going to, he's not going to be able to comment.
We got a minute to go, so tell us.
He's not going to be able to comment on the death of McCain, but he's going to speak about all of these issues. And it's going to be Thursday, 2 nights from tonight at 7 o'clock, Marcus Garvey Park. The film of a talk by Bob Avakian, the Trump-Pence regime must go in the name of humanity. We refuse to accept a fascist America. People can go to Revolution Books website, Revolution Books NYC website, to get more information. And come out Thursday night, spread the word on it. Get the Facebook event page and spread the link on your social media and everywhere else.
We don't have enough time for this, but revolution is an act. It's not a dinner party. Let's put it that way.
Certainly isn't.
But at the same time, the RCP advocates absolute nonviolent approach, and
we advocate a nonviolent approach to driving out the Trump-Pence regime. I mean, the actual revolution, it's going to come down to meeting and defeating the attempts at violent suppression by this system. And we've got a pamphlet on our strategy called How We Can Win, how we can really make revolution, which you can get at Revolution Books up in Harlem.
And learn more about that.
Learn more about it.
All right, thank you very much for joining us. Carl Dick's always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me on.
And we'll see you next week, all right, guys? All right, it's a lot to think about. That's it.